Hello and welcome to Broken Entertainment. So, I made a couple videos a while back, last year actually, on George R. R. Martin and kind of does he still care about the Winds of Winter? Does he still care about the Song of Ice and Fire? Is he going to finish the series? And, are the fans owed the next books? Are the fans owed him completing the series since they have gotten him, to where he is now? He's very, very wealthy. He's doing quite well for himself. Um, and you talk about George R. R. Martin, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to set off a firestorm, especially if it's not necessarily uh, super supportive of him, let's say. And I had said in those videos, I said, look, I don't have a stake in this fight because I am not terribly interested in Song of Ice and Fire. I'm not interested in the TV show. I'm mostly interested in it from the perspective of a writer, and how we should think of these things as we're writing. And Stirred Up Big Hornet's Nest, very successful videos, really, and really interesting commentary. I really like the way most of the people who comment on either side really talked about it. And now I've gotten to where a year later, more than, not quite a year later, I guess this was in March. Yeah, more than a year later. We're going into 2023, aren't we? Man, time is just like whipping out the window, right? So, anyway, I'm bored. I'm like, okay, I need something to read. And by read, of course, I mean listen to audiobooks because that's what I have time for. And I was trying this book and this guy, this author, and I'll do a review, probably a abbreviated review because I didn't finish the book. This author was, he's using women and men instead of men and women, which, I got to thinking about that. And I said, when do people actually really say men and women, either in book form or in conversation? You basically don't. I mean, it comes up every now and then, but it's not that common. And I was seeing it just like constantly in this book. And, the Broken Entertainment side of me is going, okay, this guy's trying to make some sort of political argument basing his book in a certain point of view. And one way you can do that, is by switching around language like that. A lot of times when you see somebody say women and men instead of men and women, it's because they're trying to make some sort of point about, putting women first, etc., etc. So I'm already like, ugh, this is going to be a political book. But I said, you know what? Last time I came across a book like this was Rage of Dragons. That turned out to be a really good book, and the guy was doing it mostly as a world building thing because in his world, it was a matriarchal society, and it made some sense then. And then they described the emperor, and the emperor is a woman, and I'm like, but the word for emperor, if it's a woman, is empress. And I'm like, okay, never mind. I shut it down because I'm so tired. I don't want any of it. I don't want even a drop. I don't want even a tiny bit of politics anymore. My scale used to be fairly high, where I'd be like, okay, I'll roll my eyes at this scene, whatever. But it's gotten to the point now where it's been so oversaturated in media that I'm just like, oh God, I don't care, and I just move on. So I'm looking through the search function on Audible. I'm like, I just don't see anything. And I'm waiting for the next Sun Eater Chronicle book to come out. I'm waiting for the next Stormlight Archive book to come out. So I'm kind of in this spot, right, where I'm like, okay, what am I going to read? So finally I'm like, you know what? I am writing a fantasy novel. It's one of my projects. And I have long said one of the things I don't like about Game of Thrones and George R. R. Martin is I don't like how dark it is. And I don't like the nihilism that's in it. I said, but one thing I could do, because I know he's a good writer, is I could listen to the books and watch House of the Dragon, not Game of Thrones. I know how that ended. I'm not interested. I could watch House of the Dragon and kind of see what is useful for me in that, in the sense of, do I want to push my own work a little bit darker, and where does it go too far? Where does it, and then if I'm going to write a fantasy novel that is intentionally not super nihilistic, how do I want to, do I want to view a book that generally is more nihilistic and dark, and kind of push them up against each other, and see what I end up thinking. So I said, fine. Started watching House of the Dragon, and you know what? It's not bad. It's not amazing. It's not, it's not going to revolutionize TV for me, but it's really not bad. And episode 5, I haven't gotten to episode 6 yet. Episode 5 was great. And I said, hey, wow, there's some stuff in here that I can really learn from. And I still don't have a book to read. So I pulled up Song of Ice and Fire on Audible, and I have been listening to the first Game of Thrones novel. So the actual novel titled Game of Thrones. And I have, 11 hours left. 11 hours and 47 minutes left. And I said, you know what? I'm going to listen to it. And I've not regretted listening to it, but I still stand by my belief. It's very dark. He says, oh, I'm writing characters who are all shades of gray. Nobody's all good, nobody's all evil. I actually am not really sure he pulls that off entirely, but I see what he's saying. But there's definitely stuff I'm like, you know what? There are things that as a writer I can learn from here. And I can certainly push my book a little darker than it was. I think people in general like a somewhat dark fantasy. A Song of Ice and Fire got really popular because of HBO. So I've been listening to it, and he's a good writer, and there's from a writing perspective, there's a lot of technical stuff I can definitely learn from and use. And from the perspective of how I want to present my fantasy novel, yeah, I've been going back and rewriting the beginning of it because I want to change the pacing anyway. And I'm like, there's some directions I can push this in, and some of that had come from being around at the time that I started around the Twitter writing community way too much. I didn't want the main character to be a Boy Scout, but if you're not careful and you spend enough time around certain parts of the writing community on the internet, you end up self-correcting and self-editing and saying, no, that won't work. That'll get this person upset. And it's like, you know what? Nobody has the right to not be offended. So I'm going to write this the way that it makes sense. So it is going to push a little darker. It's not going to be Song of Ice and Fire dark, where, everything fails, everybody dies. And, there are things that he does that I'm actually very happy to see that he does, because I think a lot of times it gets kind of brushed over in fiction, where it's like, yeah, some pretty bad stuff happens in the Middle Ages when a town gets conquered. Put it that way. And there's a lot of fantasy books that just kind of brush that under the rug. It's mostly an inconvenience or something, or they just don't talk about it. And I don't want a hyper focus on the bad things, but I don't want to ignore them either. So generally, I've really been enjoying the book. It's not my favorite book. It's not Way of Kings. I do not see to this point where people are getting their George R. R. Martin hero worship. I do think he's a good writer. I have always said I thought he's a good writer because you can't get this kind of response My video's got this video has over 21,000 views on it. Um, I'm seeing videos over on the side here that have 55,000 views and 2 million views and so on. And the, 386 comments and the argument back and forth in the comment section, that doesn't come from a writer who's bad. And I'm still interested in the answers to these questions. I'm still, these videos are still up. Sometimes I take down older videos just because they've been out for a long time. Because I really find, people still watching them, and I really find the conversation around these ideas of what does a writer owe their audience, what should audience expectations be, can writers be burnt out on their own series? I find these very interesting conversations. And I'm going to do a book review on A Song of Ice and Fire, on Game of Thrones when it's done. I've got 11 hours left. But generally, this far into it, I find that there's a lot of stuff that I can learn from as a writer, and there's a lot of stuff that I can look at and say, I don't want to take it that far. And I'll do a review on House of the Dragon eventually. I want the first season to be complete before I really review that. I'm not going to do episode by episode. I'll just do the season. And, if I had to tell you why it's not my favorite fantasy still, a lot of it is the Nihilism in the Darkness. I'm good with a book getting pretty dark as long as it comes back out the other side, right? Because I like to see the heroes challenged to the nth degree and pushed farther than they ever thought they could go and have terrible things happen to them. But I also like the hero to come out on the right side at the end. And that's not happening, of course, with the Song of Ice and Fire. And I like the hero to be more or less a good person. Whether they make bad decisions, whether they do bad things, that's a different story. But I don't want to feel dirty liking the character, right? Unless it's a villain, and one of those villains that you love to hate kind of thing. And that's where I differ philosophically, I think, from a lot of Song of Ice and Fire fans and from George R. R. Martin himself. It doesn't even always have to be a happy ending. It just has to be the kind of story where I don't walk away feeling worse than when I started. I talked to some people about the Batman movie that came out not terribly long ago with, what's his name, that used to be the sparkly vampire guy. And I still haven't seen it. I was going to watch it and review it, but it just looked really dark and like it didn't ever come out the other side. And I asked some people about it, and one of the guys I asked, he said, well, I really liked the movie. I didn't come out feeling better about it or life in general when I got out of the movie, but it was fun. It does make you feel good. And I kind of like at least a little bit of that when you come out of a movie or a book, that maybe you feel a little bit better. Or maybe you feel like, hey, you know what? Stuff went down in this book. Bad stuff happened. But somebody at least came out on the other side of that. Because that can make you think in life, when you're facing something really difficult, you know what? There's another end to this. And that's kind of what I like fiction to do. So, up to this point, my favorite fantasy remains The Way of Kings and the Stormlight Archive. And that gets pretty dark as well, if you're not familiar with it. But in each book, there is an upcycle. So I like books to push, and I like things to get pretty dark for characters as long as there is something at the end. And, it's kind of like The Empire Strikes Back. The movie ends where they lose. but you don't come out of it feeling terrible, right? Um, Luke is able to confront his demons, essentially, and come out the other side, not falling to darkness. And they lose Han Solo, but they're able to get away. They're able to um, live to fight another day. So there's a little bit of that upward swing. So those are just my thoughts on the Game of Thrones novel and everything. I still think, George R. R. Martin may finish The Winds of Winter. He's not going to finish The Dream of Spring. If he does, I'll be super happy, and I'll make a video, and I'll be happy about it. It'll be great. I'll be really happy for the fans. But being realistic, looking at how each book has taken consecutively longer to write, and at his age, I just don't think it's going to happen. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of George R. R. Martin's writing and what writers can maybe learn from him. And if you like the video, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Ring the bell for notifications, and I will see you next time.